I'm Kevin Tedeschi, the Executive Director and CEO of the Edgar Cayce work, and I'm here today with M.K. Welsch, the author of Sacred Journey, Edgar Cayce, the Bible, and the Path to Enlightenment. M.K., thanks for being here with us today. First of all, I'd like to ask, why is it you decided to write this book? How did it come about?
Well, you know, I've been a student of the Cayce material for over 40 years, and I love it, obviously. And one of the reasons that I think it began was really with a request from a friend of mine several years ago who said she had explored the Edgar Cayce material and she liked it, but she was trying to make heads and tails out of it. It was a little bit difficult for her to understand and put together the big picture. So I kept thinking, well, you know, we really need to do, there's many, many wonderful books about the Cayce information, many of which have helped me on my own journey. But I thought, you know, I always felt like we really needed a book that talked about the journey of the soul and kind of put the whole big picture together. And I was waiting, and suddenly it occurred to me, oh, maybe I'm supposed to write it. So I decided to take that on and try to write the journey of the soul in terms of what Cayce has said, looking through the lens of the master soul, the Christ. And you know, in the readings, there are, you know, over 14,000 of them. And they were given to people over how many decades? 4 decades? Young, old, rich, poor, male, female, etc. So the pieces of this story are scattered throughout all of those readings. So that was kind of the challenge of writing the book. But I hope I have presented the passage of the soul through time and space in a way that explains what Edgar Cayce meant in terms of why we are here and what we're supposed to do with this lifetime that we've been given.
Is that what you would describe as the sacred journey, the passage of the soul?
Yeah, Cayce talks about it, I think, in terms of this journey really started at the beginning of time as we know it, when we lost track kind of who we were, and we stepped away from the knowledge of the fact that we were children of God. It's really, you know, the story of the prodigal son in the New Testament, that parable that Jesus gives. That's really the story of the sacred journey, I think, because it's the young man who's the son of a wealthy father, and he leaves his father's house thinking that he could find better things out there somewhere. Well, life doesn't go quite as he had planned, and he spends all of his money in what the Bible calls riotous living, etc. And suddenly, he's in a foreign land, poverty-stricken, so hungry that he would eat the husks that they were giving the swine. And suddenly, and there's a very interesting and profound wording in the Bible. It said he came to himself. Suddenly, it's as if he woke up and decided, I don't need to be here. My father's house has everything that I need. Why don't I go home? And so he does start home. Not sure if his father's going to accept him or not, but he's almost there. His father sees him in the distance, runs out and gives him the royal ring, saying to basically, son, all that I have is yours, and it always has been that. So that's really what the journey is, that we as souls that came here in the beginning at some point veered off the path and forgot who we really are, that we were totally connected to God. And now we're on our way back. And the Christ, according to Cayce, came to show us the way back to that. So in a nutshell, the sacred journey is this path back to God, and it's a path that every soul in the earth is on, but it's also a very unique path that each of us has. And at the end of the day, however, we all end up in the same place.
Great. Your book includes the subtitle, The Path to Enlightenment, and that's a term that perhaps many would associate with Eastern religions. How does that equate to the Edgar Cayce readings?
Well, you know, a lot of people, myself included for a long time, have thought of enlightenment kind of as the guru sitting in the cold, dark cave for years at a time, away from the world, you know, meditating, and they're going to become enlightened. And most of us think, and it's true, myself included, I could never do that. But I almost like to think of it in terms of, and I get the feeling from the Cayce readings that this is the case. If you think about a cartoon character where the light bulb goes off on the top of their head, and it's like that aha moment where they actually, or we, become conscious. And the Cayce readings talk about it in terms, of, again, of Jesus, that he came and he was an example to us. And what we find out in terms of enlightenment from him is the life he lived, which every single moment he was aware of the omnipresence, the presence of God within him and around him. And he manifested that. And he manifested it magnificently in such a way that he was able to teach and to heal and to help people. But he, in essence, said to us, you can do it too. So how do we reach that state? Well, the Cayce readings talk about meditation, as do most of the masters in both the Eastern and Western traditions. And that's why meditation is a big theme in the book, and it's why it's considered so important. Because what we're asked to do is to go inside to the center of our being and find that spark of God, that fire that's burning within us, and in a sense, touch that holy fire. And then take that flame of love that we found in there and carry it out into the world. Cayce calls it application. And that is what enlightenment is.
That may tie into our next question, which is the book includes the idea that life is really a purposeful experience for each one of us. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, Cayce has a lot to say about purpose because, just as I've mentioned, he talks about the fact that the idea of application and using what we know is really central to how life well lived. As I stand back and look at the Cayce material, I kind of divide the idea of purpose into two parts. One's the big picture, which Cayce said is the reason every soul came to earth, and I'm paraphrasing here, but essentially he says we come here to know ourselves, to be ourselves, yet one with God. To know ourselves, to know that we're children of God. To be ourselves, to express that uniqueness that each of us has, and yet to know that we're one with the whole. And then the second idea of purpose is more specific. It's the fact that each soul, he says, has come to this world in order to contribute its gifts, to offer something and help raise up the whole. And you know, it doesn't matter if you're an engineer who builds roads and bridges, or a truck driver, or a homemaker, an artist, a teacher, or a world leader. Whatever life path that you have, or particular career that you're following, it's your duty and responsibility to carry the light that was given to you out into whatever expression you've put forth this lifetime. And that's kind of our sacred purpose on earth. And ultimately, Cayce says that we should just be up and doing and do something wherever we are to make the world a better place because we've lived in it. And that's really what the purpose is.
Oh. Students of the readings may know that Edgar Cayce read the Bible once through for every year of his life. Can you talk a little bit more about the correlation between Cayce, the Bible, and the readings?
Well, it's interesting with the Cayce readings. When he was giving his readings, he not only used stories and talked about people in the Bible, he actually lifted language and phrases directly from biblical text. And one of the underlying themes in the Cayce readings is the idea of reincarnation. And it's really interesting that many of the people he gave readings to, we find out later on, were characters in the Bible, many of whom also lived at the time of the Christ. So it's almost as if that soul group came back and that somehow their paths crossed Edgar Cayce and helped to explain all of those things that they had probably run into even in another lifetime. And you find many things in the Cayce readings that explain different things in the Bibles, and you'll find these little gems. Like I think one of the gems in the Cayce readings is his interpretation of the Lord's Prayer, which most people are familiar with if they come from a Christian tradition. But he didn't see it as just some pious words that Jesus uttered so to show his disciples how to pray. He really saw it as a series of affirmations or almost invocations to help us open up and start vibrating the spiritual centers in our own bodies so that we can find the God within us. So it's as if Jesus also left us a legacy to say, okay, students, okay, folks, here's how you do it. Excuse me. So it's funny, too, because in the terms of the Bible, somebody once asked Cayce, what version of the Bible is better? What should I use? And basically he said, use whatever one you're going to apply. And that really kind of sums up his attitude toward the Bible in a nutshell.
Can you explain to us a little bit how Cayce's perspective on Jesus might differ a little from mainstream religion?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that because it probably differs a lot. I talk in the book about the fact that Cayce, to me, moves Jesus from the idea of an idol that we're supposed to worship to an ideal that we're supposed to reach for and try to follow. And that's perhaps, in essence, one of the biggest differences. You know, Cayce said that Jesus came 2,000 years ago. He was the first begotten of God. He was our elder brother. And he came 2,000 years ago again to help us, his brothers and sisters, find their way home. And it's interesting in terms of when you think about reincarnation as well, because one of the things that Cayce talks about, which I don't think I've ever found in any other religion, is the idea that the soul that became Jesus had reincarnated. It was the soul that was Adam in the beginning. It also had other incarnations as Joseph in the Old Testament, the coat of many colors, of Joshua, Moses' aide, who became the warrior, Jeshua, who was one of the Jewish leaders after the Babylonian captivity, and even a psalmist named Asaph, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that. But this soul trod the earth many, many times and kept learning, just as we are, which gives us, I think, unending hope, kept learning until it had reached the stage where it was, the state of perfection had reached Christhood. The other thing Cayce talks about, which I've always loved, is the fact of really placing Jesus firmly in a human community. He talks about the fact that he studied as a young boy, that he laughed. Cayce talks several times about the fact that Jesus had a great sense of humor. He ate with people, he enjoyed people, he had challenging moments, he had friends who abandoned him, but all the time he was uniquely and fully manifesting that God force that was in him in its magnificence, in such a way that he taught and he healed. And I guess the final thing I'd say about that in terms of Jesus was that Cayce was very ecumenical. He called Jesus the man and the Christ the Spirit of God within him. And he indicated that anyone can manifest that spirit, and it doesn't matter if you call yourself a Christian or a Jew or a Hindu or a Buddhist or a Muslim or even an agnostic. That dwells within you, and that Spirit of God is you. He called Jesus the pattern and the Christ the power. So I think he's got a very different take than a lot of other religions, but to me, a very, very hopeful take.
Are there other concepts in the readings that are presented in your book?
Actually, there are quite a few of them. I think the wonderful thing about Edgar Cayce, I mean, he died in 1945, over 70 years ago. And I think we've only begun to scratch the surface of the depth and breadth of things that were said in those readings about the body, mind, and spirit. Cayce talked about, well, obviously he talked about reincarnation, but he talked about this lifetime for everybody as being an opportunity for soul growth. And that, interestingly, everything we meet in our life, every circumstance, every person, every condition is something there to mirror back to us who we are and help us to see and help us to grow. Setting one's ideals, mentally, physically, and spiritually was a huge part of the Cayce philosophy. He also talked about the power of thought and us being co-creators and the idea of us being aware of what our thought forms are because they're going to come into manifestation. And he talked as well about keeping one's attitudes and emotions in check. And of course, as you know, there were just thousands upon thousands of physical readings where he was helping people who came to him to heal diseases of body and mind. And the interesting thing about the Cayce readings is that he said, no matter what you use to heal, whatever kind of medicine or surgery, whatever you turn to, all healing actually comes from within. And what it is the soul, creative soul forces that are alive in every cell of our bodies every moment of the day. So that's a huge concept in the Cayce reading. So all in all, he left us a legacy. I guess I forgot probably the largest one, sorry, which is underlying everything is love. Everything that Cayce talked about was through the filter of love, and he really did say that we are our brother's keeper, and it is up to us to make this world a better place. And in fact, he said, we're only going to get to heaven leaning on the arm of someone that we've helped along the way. So needless to say, there is a lot for us to work toward.
Wow. What do you hope readers take away after having the opportunity to read your book?
Well, my hope and sincere desire is that they will find some hope. One of the things that Edgar Cayce said, and well, I guess I should preface that by saying that those who are drawn to this and want to explore it, I hope that they find something there for themselves. Because on a side note, one of the things I've always admired about Edgar Cayce, and something that he said about his own work and his own readings, was, if this doesn't resonate with you, please stay away from it, because it's obviously not your path, and that's fine. But I hope it helps people, especially those who might have trouble with church dogma, things about sin and everlasting punishment, and all of those kinds of, kind of bugaboos that have come down through centuries of religious tradition. And Cayce turns those a little bit on their head, because he really does, from start to finish, look at everything through the filter of love. And I hope that people will understand that they are children of God and find hope in the fact that nothing that they've ever done or could ever do in the future could ever separate them from their Creator. You're made of it. It's in you. That's who you are. So for me, hope is the operative word, and hopefully someday somebody may look up from the book and say, oh, maybe there's more to this life than I thought. And that would please me greatly.
Well, MK, thank you so much for spending time with us today.
I appreciate you having me, Kevin. Thank you.
Sacred Journey, Edgar Cayce, the Bible, and the Path to Enlightenment is available through A.R.E. Press and can be found at arecatalog.com.